Colin McNeese, how are you, sir?
Great, Spencer. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey, my pleasure, man. It's always fun to get to. We go to lunch, we talk on occasion, but it's always fun to have a chance to invite cool people, smart people to talk self-funded. So you have, I think, a really short commute as well. You were saying you didn't even know this building was here, but you live.
I live literally 1 mile away, less than that. So,
but I had no idea this was even here.
No, I didn't even know this was here.
Studio.
It's a great studio. Really impressed with the digs here. It's great.
Yeah, man. I mean, this is legit. I think when you see it on screen, you have a certain level of appreciation, but when you actually walk into the room, you're like, oh my goodness, this is actually legit.
Professional. Yeah, it's professional. Doing a great job.
Well, you can see why as soon as I saw it, I'm like, I know what I'm doing with this. So
smart man.
So anyways, man, of course, we're going to talk self-funding today. We're going to talk all things employee benefits. You're obviously a senior advisor for MMA, and so we'll get into a lot of the, what value you bring to the table, what kind of you're seeing that's happening in the industry. But I think before that, it's good to get to know the person.
Sure.
So if you'll take a moment, tell me who you are, family-wise, career-wise. I'd love to kind of get to know you.
Yeah, so I've been a Frisco resident for over 20 years. Got 3 kids, all in high school here, fighting raccoons. So we'll be pushing for them on Friday nights, and just really enjoying the community and the growth. Oh my goodness, just all the opportunities here in Frisco.
So you're original resident of Frisco.
Original. Yeah, when there was like 1 grocery store, now there's 3 dozen.
Well, what's it been like? Because I'm up in Prosper, which is just north, and I'm, of course, Prosper's, let's call it 10 years maybe behind what Frisco's development-wise is, but what has it been like seeing that over 2 decades to where Frisco is kind of a premier destination in Texas, if not the United States? I mean, what's that been evolution-wise? Yeah,
no, that's been excellent. I'm able to set a lot of appointments here in Frisco. People are willing to come to Frisco, go grab a cup of coffee at the Ascension, at the Star, or all the great locations that we have here. So,
yeah, the Star is an incredible attraction, man. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe, not hard to believe, but it's interesting that that's where even Jerry Jones picked as the headquarters for the Cowboys up in Frisco, because I grew up in Mansfield, and Frisco wasn't. I didn't even know what Frisco was. Nobody ever talked about it. And then you flash forward 20 years, and this thing it's built up like crazy.
And I'm still surprised. I mean, there's just always something new popping up, and I don't know when it'll end. It's pretty amazing.
Well, I hope it doesn't end, because the cool thing about this is doing this podcast in person means obviously logistically it'd be hard if people aren't here. So there's a pretty nice pool of people to choose from.
I think
locally.
so.
Yeah.
I think so. You're not going to have a problem with that. It's a great destination.
Well, so tell me career-wise though. So how'd you get started in the benefits world?
Yeah, so I got started, 26, 27 years ago, and like most people that fall into this line of work, I had no dreams or aspirations of being a benefit consultant. I actually have a systems degree, management information systems from Baylor, and my first job was working with a manufacturer, and they wanted me to work on the HRIS system, do some implementation with JD Edwards, and then they said, well, half of your job actually is going to be running our health insurance program. Okay. So I started working with these consultants, with Foster Higgins, of all things. They're now part of Mercer. A long time ago, and I just really connected with them, and looking at the analytics, the data-driven underwriting, actuarial work behind supporting a self-funded plan. So we had about 3,000 or 4,000 employees on this program.
So really, working in the systems world but getting pulled into benefits is what exposed you to self-funding.
That's how that got me into benefits and self-funding. So I've been a big proponent of group insurance and self-funding, since the very beginning. And that's what did it. And so after 3 years of kind of doing both, I just flipped over to the consulting side, employee benefit
intentionally. Was
side.
You decided, hey, this is what I'd prefer to do?
I just enjoyed it a lot more, and I thought my skill set could really add some value there. And that was in a period of time when costs were really starting to increase, kind of similar to where we are today.
What era was that? Was it in the 90s or?
94, 95.
Okay. So what was because I was post-ACA self-funding.
Right.
So tell me what pre-ACA self-funding looked like versus now.
Oh, well, a lot more fun.
I know it's a lot to unpack.
A lot more fun, yeah. Not as many compliance concerns, and just a lot more administrative burden right now than where it was before.
Was there something in particular? Like, what is it that you latched on? Because obviously MIS is a completely different area of expertise. So how did you go, that is what I'd prefer to do, or I'm interested in?
Well, I think I really enjoy the data aspect of it, digging into the census, the demographics, finding out really what's causing the financial performance of the plan, the good and the bad and the ugly, coming up with real strategies based upon data, facts, and logic. And it's just something that really
well, when you made the transition, did you stay with the original company, or did you leave to go to a benefits consulting firm or something?
Well, I didn't flip over to Foster Higgins. I flipped over to a local agency, a consulting group, and that's where I really started working on a wide variety of clients, mostly upper mid-market. I had a number of clients that were I guess I'd characterize them holding companies,
Okay.
and they're always adding on, 2 or 3 cases a month. So always in this perpetual cycle of evaluating information, and lucky to have a lot of clients that, they wanted quantified results. They didn't want to know that inflation was going up 9% per the Wall Street Journal. They wanted me to prove it, and show it in the numbers.
So was it the numbers themselves that's what you were able to latch onto?
I think
because
so.
It's quantifiable and measurable.
And discover the Pareto principle, where 80% of your claims caused by 20% of your patients. And it's really more like 5 or 6% of your patients are driving about 60-65%. So, that type of underwriting and actuarial analysis is something I really latched onto.
So this was in the 90s, then walk me through the progression, because obviously you've been in the consulting world for a period of time now, right? 20 plus years. I'm sure we'll get into what's changed over the course of that time. But was it's something that you intentionally stayed in because it was interesting, because you felt you could impact this space? What was the driver around building a career out of benefits?
Well, I was able to join a few up-and-coming consulting firms.
Okay.
And, it's a nice ride, starting as number 3 in a group, and got up to about 150 employees, and, just kind of progressed through the ranks, and it's a good ride.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's a great space. It's quite frankly the only space in the insurance industry that I have much interest in. Of course, I'm in more technology focused now, but I mean, was there ever a time that you were working on anything small group or anything, fully insured stuff where you're just doing more transactional benefits?
Yeah, absolutely. Even with the larger groups, they're spinning off small groups, divestitures, and of course, we want to work with the same executive teams we've done in the past. They move over and start a new group or a startup. Of course, we want to provide that assistance, and it's just that we have all the tools and resources for the larger mid-market, but that we can push down to small group and even assist with the underwriting with fully insured. But what levers do you tend to like to pull with a fully insured group? You're not going to be able to take them self-funded for whatever reason, but what levers do you think are still impactful in that small group fully insured space? Well, it's in the underwriting, and a lot of times the carrier is going to use assumptions that are really in their favor.
Sure.
And so you have to make lobby cases as far as why they're too high, and really.
Well, they're never too low, right?
You
never have to make the case that they're too low and they should raise the price. And unfortunately, that's how that works. But I mean, I can see that why you would consider the self-funded space in the mid-market to large group the most interesting. Was it a continual progression for you over your career, or was it as soon as that was the introduction for you, that's it? Like that's what you wanted to do?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Once I was on the brokerage side, the consulting side, I didn't want to flip over to the carrier. I kind of wish I had 3 or 4 years in the carrier world, at the very beginning of my career, but spent that with a plan sponsor. So that's a unique angle of how to manage a health plan from there. But no, thoroughly enjoy the brokerage consulting world. It changes so much, keeps you on your toes. And there's just a lot of things. 2020,
right? Like, I mean, talking about changing.
Oh my gosh.
like what, let's spend some time on that, because I think it's probably worthy to unpack. What changed in 2020 benefits wise? We know kind of, loss ratios are down for the carriers. We know claims were down, but from a benefits perspective and helping these employers through something like an unprecedented style shutdown, what happened in 2020 from your perspective?
Well, yeah, it was a very disruptive year. A lot of deconstruction with companies and whole industries, frankly, just kind of got wiped out. But the healthcare costs really didn't change that much in 2020. We really had a fear that we'd see a huge spike due to inpatient COVID utilization, but really didn't materialize that much. Pharmacy still went up quite a bit.
It did, okay.
So that's been a big problem. But I'm a little concerned about January 2022, middle of next year. I think we could see a return of some pretty big increases on the medical side.
Oh, you think we'll see some spikes again?
I think so. Yeah. I think so. Kudos to the insurance world. They did their best to keep low renewals last year in a very, very frustrating, stressful time. And they may have to recoup some of that next year. I don't know. We'll have to watch that.
Well, I'm hearing some rumblings, especially in the stop loss space, of the unprecedentedly low loss ratios because of the reduction in prevalence and severity of claims, but also Now what's going to be on the other side of that? Is it a correction? Is it an overcorrection? Is it a normalization? Are we back to where we probably would have been on the trend line, 2019 to 2021? Or are we going to see a massive, kind of pendulum swing the other direction because of potentially the blip like you're talking about, where we're going to see a spike again? Nobody knows. I don't think anybody knows.
Well, nobody
for sure.
knows,
Yeah.
and I am concerned. I've heard this said. I've seen it in the data. We've seen a reduction in use of primary care.
Reduction in primary care?
Wellness. People, did not take advantage of the preventive checks in 2020. They couldn't go to the doctor.
Yeah.
So I'm scared that we may be catching cancers at a later stage.
Yeah.
3 years down the road. I'm afraid that could happen. Maybe it doesn't materialize. I would highly encourage everybody that's managing a plan right now to re-educate, re-communicate, get people back in the habit of using the preventive benefits, getting into well checks, because that's going to have a material impact.
Well, I have no doubt about that things are going to be caught later on than they should have been.
Right.
I can even just think like having a baby. My wife had a baby in 2017, and then versus we had a baby in 2020, and I can tell you, same location, same hospital. I won't name the hospital here locally, but it was night and day difference in terms of not only the actual labor and delivery side, but as well as all the checks that she went to beforehand. I think I only got to go to the first checkup with her OBGYN, and then it was like husbands can't go, kids can't go, mom's got to show up by herself, and just even the level of, I think, it's like that touch and care that she got. I don't know if it was on par of what was typical, but it's certainly an atypical experience in the process of going to the doctor. And that's just a routine, regular checkup for a woman having a baby. So it's like, what everything else are you not thinking about in terms of preventative measures, because you're not really even considering that at all today. So I'm hopeful, I'm hopeful you're not right, though I suspect you probably are, is that there's going to be a comeuppance for that lack of preventative.
Well, there's a chance. And so, like I said, it's a good time to re-communicate, re-engage your employees, make sure they're fully using those benefits, because they do matter.
Well, what from the employer perspective, because I think that's something that we need to talk about more, is everything we do in this space, and you do in particular, is on behalf of an employer, but the people that are selling solutions on the carrier and vendor side sometimes lose the fact that the employer is impacted ultimately by these. So what perspective from them has changed? How are they interacting and perceiving new solutions and things you're bringing to the table? Are they more receptive or less receptive after 2020?
I think they're still in survival mode. The HR space, CFO space, they're so concerned with concerns about hybrid workforce. Mm-hmm. Do you bring back people 100% or allow them to work from home? The differences in salary by geography. Do you have a vaccine surcharge or not? There's some major questions on the HR side that I think people are really focused on right now. And like I said, we've been able to keep benefit costs relatively stable for this last 12, 18 months. And so having said that, I'm seeing a lot of innovation in our space. It's kind of crowded, very excited about it. I think it could materially impact positively our health plans.
So what kind of innovation are you focused on?
Well, I'm working with a number of companies that are expanding the ability of transparency, employee advocacy, to help steer people to the most cost-efficient, clinically effective care, which is very impactful.
So transparency from like the hospital billing side, what they're doing in the governmental space, or what type of transparency are we talking?
Just be aware of the costs.
Okay.
So at the time of service, be aware of the cost of what you're discussing with your doctor, to include pharmaceuticals. Because that's just something that hasn't been done in the past, and I think a lot of people weren't aware or aren't aware of the wide variation in cost in the system for the exact same quality of care. And now we have the ability to educate people, engage them, provide them an incentive, maybe comp their deductible, so that they, from a stewardship point of view, take the most cost-efficient, clinically effective route. Yeah. And they win, the plan wins, quality actually increases. Every year, we see better and better apps come out, technology, integration, the ability to coordinate care, and advocate for people. I'm a big fan of direct primary care. That's not always going to work due to networks and whatnot. So you're still going to need some sort of system, I think, to hit all of your employees through multiple states and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, how do you get the engagement, right? Or when do you get engaged with a member? How do you know in advance for everything that they need to get in terms of care in order to provide that coordination or even the steerage component? I love the incentivization versus the, kind of the wielding the stick and punishing people for not doing things. I mean, you mentioned vaccine surcharges possibly. Of course, there's smoker surcharges and things like that. But I think the more you can do to encourage a member, whether it's deductible lowering, whether it's waiving the out-of-pocket, whether that's, gift cards. I don't know what all the compliance, things are, but I think you're going to get a higher adoption rate when the individual has incentive to do something rather than being punished for not doing it.
Well, it's so important. I think the carrot approach is so much more valuable than a stick, and it definitely works. But I think you have to give them an incentive. Money talks, one way or the other. Because you're talking about psychology here. You're trying to get in somebody's head, engage them, and have them be aware of all the options that are available to them and make informed decisions. Because I think people are going to generally make good decisions if they have the information. It's just something they haven't had in the past in a way that they could readily use.
Well, do you think the member is intentionally left in the dark? I mean, not to get too sinister in terms of the system and the way it's set up, but I mean, if the member had the information at their fingertips, of course you could trust them to make a more informed decision. But most of the time, you don't have that information. So is the system, is that part of it? Did it just happen by accident?
Yeah, that's a big problem. And I think there's a populist movement has been growing for years to try to demand transparency.
Yeah.
Know exactly what those costs are. And, with the legislation coming up, I know both physicians are adjusting the way they bill through, and the insurance carriers right now, they're adjusting their processes and introducing new platforms to check and double check the new ICD-10 codes coming out.
Yeah, I remember going through, their ICD-10 codes now?
Yeah, 10 codes.
Wow. Do you think I know the legislation obviously is sometimes dependent upon who's in office and what the motivations are. Do you think that transparency, what was it? It was the hospital billing or no surprise billing. Do you think that's going to stick, or is that possibly in jeopardy?
I think it's possibly in jeopardy. I don't want to dwell on it because I really believe in it.
Yeah.
And I know it's been delayed, but I am hearing rumblings that, it could be delayed permanently, So yeah, I think it does matter who's in the executive branch.
Yeah, I think that's true.
As far as enforcement goes.
Yeah.
There's always ways of pulling it back. It's very painful for the provider community right now. So,
I think it's up in the air too. They don't know if they have to comply at the moment or not, or how much do you have to comply. And
it's not easy either.
It's not easy. Yeah.
They have to spend a lot of money on their systems to get that transparency application up and running.
But I mean, it seems like such a not novel approach to make people compete based on quality of care, value of care. What you're actually going to charge a member seems like such an obvious thing to be able to evaluate as a member. What is it going to cost me if I go in and get this procedure? But the fact that it is so difficult to even get to that number of what's billed, let alone what's actually going to be paid, is mind-boggling to me as somebody that, even though I'm in the system, I sometimes end up falling victim to just not having a lot of choice or not exactly knowing ahead of time. And it's like you feel dumb by the time you get that EOB and go, oh, that's what they billed me for. It's just it's incredible that it's set up that way. So we'll talk about fixes. Of course, we're going to talk about how we address that. I'd like to spend a couple minutes, if you don't mind, smaller group self-funding. I mean, because that's where I love to talk about the little guy, the mid-market guy. Right. What's happening in that space? What are you seeing there?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I talked about the deconstruction I witnessed in 2020. We all did, but a lot of the CFOs, VPs of finance that I was working with in prior years have left those organizations, some forced out or, their industry struggled, whatever. They're on their own. They're starting new operations, a tremendous amount of entrepreneurship. I'm very excited about it.
Okay.
I've actually got 4 or 5 startups that I'm working on right now.
Interesting.
And these are executives that have left the big corporate rat race, basically, and they're going to go find a partner or two. Money's cheap. Get some backing and go buy a franchise or a small manufacturer or a company, and that's how they're going to ride out the rest of their career. So their perspective on benefits are, from those of like 1,000, 2,000 life groups, and now they're managing a group of 70 or 50
they still
employees.
Want to do the same
they
stuff,
still want to do
yeah.
it. And so very excited. They're very interested in finding a way of self-funding because they believe in it and they believe in the group platform. And So we'll probably use like a level funded program
Okay.
for groups until they reach about 70 employees or so, and have a number of group captives that are a great option of transferring some of that excess risk. And then, once groups get to 125, 150, I think they should be able to self-fund on their own just fine. Now, I say that, we have to make sure there's a good business fit for all of our clients, because they all have different personalities. We have a lot of Mavericks in Texas. They don't like the concept of insurance.
Yeah.
And some people will self-fund, at 50 employees, just with a traditional
Go at it on their own, huh?
Yeah.
50, yeah. I mean, I applaud the cavalierness of this. Of course, there's inherent risks.
Inherent risk.
Yeah.
What keeps me up is really more the pharmaceutical aspect of it than the medical side.
Okay.
And I'm happy to say that, we've seen some pretty big improvements in discounting and rebates for the smaller groups that are self-funded. Really good financial propositions that really were only valid for 500 life groups or even 1,000 life groups that we can deliver for 150 lives. That's probably the minimum.
Okay. Is that intentional? Were the PBMs more receptive to the smaller groups, or was this enforcement based on volume of you're bringing to the table?
I think it's the economic leverage that we're able to bring to the table, and respect for our entire book of business that we can produce rates and costs more typical of 1,000 or 2,000 life groups, larger groups, for that 150 life space, and that's a big change. And that's one of the main reasons why you may want to consider self-funding too, so you can better manage the pharmaceutical program.
Yeah, it's so funny, man. It's just like, what do you want to know when you go self-funded? It's like, what data do we need access to? What are you going to uncover when you dig into that data? I mean, it's pretty extraordinary when a group sees claims for the first time. They've never gotten claims before, at least nothing outside of a carrier packet of that canned reporting. And you're going, oh my goodness, this is what's going on. Now I can actually address that. It's actually pretty astonishing when that light bulb goes off. And I think you mentioned those guys that were in the larger group or large employers and then went off on their own. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
No, that's right.
Yeah,
I can't.
Yeah, and that's I couldn't unsee self-funding once it was introduced to me. I'm curious, so I want to go back for a second.
Well,
please.
Yeah, to those individuals, I mean, they recognize, health insurance is the second or third largest spend on their books, maybe outside of research and development or something. And so they're very aware of the costs and the efficiencies that were put in place for those larger groups. And yes, they're demanding it for small groups. So I think that's a good thing for the industry.
There's enough people making enough noise, that some of these restrictions on group sizes that are imposed by the vendors and carriers are, I don't want to say they're arbitrary because I think they're intentional from their perspective, but they're arbitrary from the employer perspective. Oh, you're not allowed to do this unless you're 100 enrolled or something of that nature. Well, why? Give me a good reason why. And the reasoning I don't think is exactly in line with the true reality of why. On the level funded space for what you're doing, are you doing a more carrier driven level funded? Or are you finding TPAs that are willing to build you kind of a package level funding for a group of that size? Like what do you, without going into specifics?
Yeah, we're probably 75% carrier.
Okay.
But I'm excited to work with a number of TPAs that have some good programs in that space. Especially if they can help with MEC programs in conjunction with the major medical, help us get through eligibility concerns. So, it's dominated by carriers, but we're starting to see some TPAs really stand up.
Well, I'm seeing that too, and that's why I said I'm seeing a lot more people entering in that space. Are we willing to put something together for employers that is relatively, I don't want to say off the shelf. There are some different, components that you can substitute. But at the end of the day, they still, at a group of that size, unless they're coming from somebody that's been a very large employer and bringing that knowledge down market, those employers still likely are going to be less open to all of these changes all at once hitting them. And so the less that they have to necessarily maybe manage from an administrative perspective, I think there's value in that, but it's still a step in the right direction, maybe away from just only the carrier model being the option that's on the table. How do you choose between what's appropriate there from a level funding versus maybe a group being a better fit for a captive? Is it down to the employer, or are there some certain situations that you think one would be a better fit for the other?
It depends on the executive team and,
Okay.
and their overall risk profile and their preferences, honestly. So we have multiple options in that space, and it's just about what are they comfortable with?
Yeah.
Because I want them to commit to the strategy. There's multiple competing systems and strategies out there that we can deploy, but I just want them to be happy with whatever we select, and then, let's check it every 3 or 4 or 5 years. But But no, a lot of good options there.
Well, I think as long as you have a good advisor, right, like you realize that there's a lot more options probably that's been introduced, or at least that you're aware of as an employer in the market, right? It's like, okay, you tell me about you. I'm speaking as Colin. What about you as an employer? What do you like? What is your risk profile like? What does your business look like? What do you ultimately want to accomplish? What is it we want to do over a 5-year period? You start to unravel that and you go, okay, whether it's an algorithm in your head or you have some sort of decision tree, but it's going, all right, based on what you've told me, perhaps this is the best, solution. Let's talk about that. Are you going into what sort of horizon do you like to look at? 3 years, 5 years minimum? What really are you wanting to get them to focus on?
Well, yeah, we'd love to get them 3-year, 4-year strategies.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely. Especially if they're coming from an entirely different option that we need to migrate them through to a different strategy.
Okay. Yeah, I think if you go, if people get so myopic and focus and go a year or two and they just knee-jerk reaction to a bad renewal or something like that, it does potentially set them up for, now we're going to react next year if things didn't go exactly as planned and maybe pull back some of the strategy. I do think you need to buy into a longer-term, purpose for what you're doing.
There are, like I said, a lot of new entrants into the market, and they're pitching their shiny, penny as far as bending the cost curve, and they get our clients' ear, and then we have to get them to focus. Okay, here's one solution, but are you aware of the big problem? Have you looked at the data? Have we demonstrated, what the key questions are, so you understand what we're trying to accomplish with this brand new vendor that you're looking at?
Yeah, it's easy to get kind of excited, and I'm in the world where people sometimes get excited about a new solution, and so you have to go, all right, well, let's really vet this, right? Let's
back up.
Yeah, let's back up. It sounds awesome.
It sounds great.
Yeah. But let's actually look at this in reality, and is this an appropriate fit? I actually do that sometimes with our prospects. It's like, I want to make sure this is the right fit, because we're not interested in doing business with somebody that changes their mind in 6 months. Like, we want to be a partner over the long term. So you tell me if this is appropriate. I think that's good, especially as technology gets infused in the space, that you are really looking at, what is this really going to do to my business? Is this really the right fit for me?
Yeah, I mean, any approach that you take is going to have a few elements to it that you hate, right?
Yeah.
So you're going off the net good, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that there's some bad aspects of any solution that you pick. So we got to make sure the executive team is on board and understands.
Well, that's the way they call it, change management, right? Like getting used to, I think there's always going to be a certain segment of the population that's a little bit reluctant to adopt something new or to change. And then you're right. Nothing is ever, everybody is on board right away and it fixes everything. Like that's not reality.
That's not reality.
Yeah.
And we have to educate our clients and get them to understand that as they figure things out. And obviously there's a big difference between working with a carrier and a TPA, for example. And so we have to gauge, what's the best personality business fit for this organization. Is it more of a carrier approach, or is it more of the flexibility of a TPA? Yeah, just one little example. I mean, but it's material. It's absolutely material, because, like you said, we want a 3-year, 4-year run. We'll check, recheck, make sure that we're meeting our objectives. But the worst thing is when you set down a path with a new vendor, and the 6 months in, the executive team thinks they made a mistake. And definitely want to avoid that.
Well, in the PBM side, I definitely want to spend a little more time in there, because I've heard rumblings of, specialty medications and new medications coming to the market, cell and gene therapy. I think you and I talked about over lunch a couple weeks ago. Obviously in the position you're in, you guys have pretty big aggregated kind of influence and buying power. But for the smaller guys, and then maybe in the carve-out PBM space, like, how has that changed over the last couple of years from your perspective?
Well, I just think there's more respect for the overall economic leverage that we can bring.
Yeah.
And so that translates into lower costs, better rebates, better functionality for smaller companies that really didn't have those options a few years ago. They're just kind of stuck with whatever the PBM said was worth. But that is new, because I've done 3 or 4 pharmaceutical projects this year, and I'm shocked at how much savings is actually available there. And I think it's just due to the economic leverage that we bring.
Well, yeah, and the fact that you can even carve out, I mean, are you pulling in independent PBMs? You're able to insert those in a situation with a 75 life group or 100 life group that maybe you weren't able to do before? Is that more common nowadays? Or what? Tell me, without going into too much specifics, I'd love to hear kind of what that actual change looks like on the ground.
Well, it's we're still working with the same PBMs.
Okay.
We're not bringing in some some unique boutique somewhere.
Okay.
We still need the economic leverage that they bring. But all the big the major PBMs
Yeah.
we work with.
Were you able to do some things that are unique maybe about sourcing from alternative source or government programs and certain things like that to help save money on some of these really, really expensive one-off drugs?
Chasing down programs, manufacturing coupons, that sort of thing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is that it's not a silver bullet, right? But I mean, if you are able to at least identify one or two of those really, really costly drugs and there's an alternative.
Yeah. We discovered that, 8-10 years ago when hereditary angioedema had some new prescription therapies, and they were $900,000 or something. So obviously we're going to attack that and look for any ways of reducing that exposure. But that's fundamentally changed our business, because you have a situation where someone could have $5,000 in medical claims and nearly $1 million in prescription drugs. Yeah. I mean, that just kind of flips the game on its head.
Are you seeing, what are you kind of seeing as a makeup of prescription versus medical, like in terms of the percentage breakdown? It's obviously shifting. How much is pharmacy making up on average nowadays?
Depending on the group, I can see it as high as 40%.
40? Okay.
Most is probably lower mid-30s, but
so a third, roughly on average, a third of the overall plan spend is
right.
pharmacy.
So when I got started, 25 years ago, that was probably 18%.
Okay.
So it's almost doubled.
Well, and I would presume probably even more of the catastrophic claims are coming from that source. I mean, those really, truly high-dollar $2 million claims are probably coming predominantly from drugs these days, right? Or at least more common that's the case. Yeah.
And some of these drugs are wonderful. They're absolutely amazing. And we're some regards to shifting costs from inpatient setting into a prescription drug.
Okay.
But no, it's very impactful. It's something we watch for. We look for alternatives whenever that's possible. And when, if someone needs the drug, they need it. It's fantastic. Yeah. But there is excess utilization in the system. Sometimes drugs are overprescribed, and anything we can do to make sure that the efficiencies are in place there.
Well, I say drugs are overprescribed, yes, and even sometimes the doctors aren't even aware of what they actually cost the member, right, or cost the plan. It's and we won't get into potentially some perverse incentives there to prescribe those, but the lack of transparency even between the provider and the member prescribing these drugs is kind of astonishing from my perspective. It's like you go there and you go, oh, this is a $5,000, $10,000 drug. Well, my doctor told me I needed it, right? Is he or she even aware of that?
A lot of times they're not.
Yeah.
And, we're having to deal with direct-to-consumer advertising. So, I watch a lot of sports on the weekend. Every fourth commercial is a drug. And I'll look up the cost, and it's, on average, $3,000 a month. Most of them I haven't seen one yet less than $1,000 a month, and a couple at $5,000 or $6,000 a month. So I mean, these are expensive meds that are being advertised and directly, hitting our clientele. And then they're just going to go to the doctor and say, "I just saw, this person looked very happy, and I want this drug."
Yeah.
And not everyone's aware that that works really well for 10% of the population, but for everybody else, maybe this old drug, 40, 50-year-old. Maintenance med works just as well, and it's $50 a month. So,
well, what's that? There's a formulation. I forgot the type of drug it is, but it's like you could off the shelf. I think it's something like Tylenol and Sudafed and something else where you combine those things together. It would be $10 or $15 over the counter, but some prescription companies put them together in their own formulation, and it's $3,000 a month or something to that effect. Yeah. There's some darkness there, but from your perspective, you mentioned some kind of innovative ideas. I'm always at least wanting to hear kind of what you're seeing in the marketplace, without maybe going in particular the actual vendor. Like what are people targeting that's new in technology, point solutions? I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, seeing a lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of innovation. It's a crowded space in the employee benefit space, but a lot of new technologies and transparency, employee advocacy. We talked about that a little earlier.
Yeah.
So really love that. Ways of engaging people to steer them to the most cost-efficient, clinically effective care. Because even with, it doesn't matter what system, network, platform you're on, you spend all your time in the world getting the absolute best average discount or cost, but there's still variation in cost within the system.
Yeah.
And you can mine those inefficiencies if you're able to identify those cost differences and then steer people there, even with the incentives that we talked about. you can see a tremendous result, and especially in sports medicine, discretionary surgeries, musculoskeletal. That's where we see dramatic price swings and great opportunity to squeeze out some costs in your plan. Just
so like bundle pricing type.
Bundle
range?
pricing, but doctor-owned facilities, surgery centers, are going to be better quality and a better rate than getting something done in a big box inpatient hospital type setting. So that's a lot of times we're not asking people to change their doctor. We're just asking people to change their setting, the location.
Yeah. Okay, so keep the same doctor, but just move facility okay, cool.
And a lot of times the doctor's not even aware of the total procedural cost varies greatly depending on the location. They may have rights to 5 or 6 or 7 spots in the city. And the same procedure could be drastically different in cost. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that, this new transparency legislation is going to help identify. Something that, as an industry insider, we all know. We've known about this for decades, but it's not well known in the public. And the more transparent we are, the more obvious this is going to be. And I'm sure that's creating a lot of friction with the hospitals.
Well, I don't know if, we call it like an awakening of sorts or whatever, but I think the more light that is shined on this problem, the better, right? Enough people are going to complain about it. Enough people are aware. I mean, it's even just generally awareness in the first place that the problem exists, right? At least the more you can point out and go, this is what's wrong over and over again, the more likely the system is going to have to react and say, okay, we'll give you this information. You can have this now. Or, there's at least enough, you mentioned economic leverage a couple of times. There's enough cultural leverage, I'd say, and enough people complaining about it to bring about a solution. So I'm all for that.
Yeah, no, that's just one other area. I mean, we're seeing a lot of new programs with weight management, diabetes, metabolism type issues.
You mentioned to me something the other day where you could get an analysis done and it was actually kind of tailor, was it your blood sugar response or something like that?
We're seeing much more, customized medicine approach, which I think is very exciting. Because I think it's going to be very impactful to bending that cost curve. And we're working with a number of organizations that actually can take a biome sample from your gut.
Okay.
And then determine exactly how your body metabolizes certain foods.
Interesting.
All right. Okay. So we know that, some people have problems with certain food groups and maybe pre-diabetic, turning to diabetic. And what they may not know is that if they simply add maybe a serving of fruit to their meal, as an example, or some other food source, that it could change the chemistry enough that they won't have the big spikes that we're all trying to manage.
So the combination of the food itself, based on the individual, tailored to the individual, they can kind of determine what the impact of the blood sugar response might be to that. It's
very interesting because before we used to say, well, you just cannot indulge in these food groups.
Yeah.
Right. Just the stick approach. Now we can say, okay, we understand you want to enjoy your life, but just use these coping mechanisms to perhaps keep you without spiking and within the norm.
Well, that's a much more technical approach. I kind of follow some people that are advocate for like the carnivore diet, right? So the people that go all meat.
Absolutely.
It seems extreme, but I think one of the reasons the mechanisms they say that works is people have a lot of inflammatory responses and they don't know exactly what trigger foods are causing it. So if you go to something that's oversimplified, like a meat-only based diet, you find that a lot of the inflammatory responses go away. But that's such an extreme measure to take, and then they might start adding foods back in to see, okay, what am I reacting to, and kind of test over time to discover, well, what can I eat? This is obviously a much more proactive way to look at that, which I think is probably the better approach to get more people around to what the actual solution is for them, rather than going to an extreme and trying to unpack it in reverse to figure out what's actually causing problems.
Yeah, no, and I think that this approach really has the potential of reducing costs. And what I want to see, Spencer, is a reduction in utilization.
Okay.
When I roll out these programs, my clients are relying on me to actually produce something that's impactful, right? There's a lot of programs out there that feel good, look good, they're wonderful. But are they going to really save you money? Are they going to create that year-over-year savings that your CFO is demanding? Mm-hmm. Most of them don't. So that's kind of the litmus test that I'm using right now. When I introduce new vendors and we're going to say we're going to go down this path and we're going to reduce our exposure here and there. I want to see it in the numbers. So
Yeah.
I'm getting back to the data, facts, and logic. I want to see a drop in prescription drugs. I want to see a drop in urgent care or emergent care because people are staying healthier. We should be able to see those types of outcomes and quantify those outcomes as we move on down the road. Because I think we're there. I think we're going to have every year more advances in medicine that provide this customized solution. Because we're all different. I mean, we're all different machines, and if we can help provide those coping mechanisms, specifically for our metabolism and our diet and whatnot, then we can really keep people out of the hospital.
Well, yeah. So the utilization, I love the fact that you take the approach of like a tangible ROI, right? Like you want to be able to quantify what is the outcome or the likely outcome of this new solution. But you mentioned kind of utilization. Is it getting people away from overutilizing care unnecessarily, or much more severe types of care when it wasn't necessary? Like when you talk about utilization, what types of driving down of utilization specifically you focus on?
Well, certain metrics within utilization. For example, another number of emergency room visits.
Sure.
I've got a number of groups where it's just excessive.
Okay.
People are going there for the wrong reasons and having major reactions that perhaps the plan is not geared to help with. So.
Yeah, the ER, that seems to be the low-hanging fruit, but the ER is definitely the one that seems to be overutilized. People, go there so unnecessarily. Sometimes people even go there for routine stuff because maybe that's all they know, or perhaps there's other economic incentives for that. But it's like if you could just focus on that one single thing as a deter people from using it, you're saving thousands of dollars per instance and driving it to a lower cost alternative. I think that's one of the more obvious ones.
That's obvious.
Yeah.
There's a couple others, but getting back to the prescription drugs, that's where I think we can really see impacted difference because that world's going up double-digit inflation every year, and there's all these new drugs coming out. We talked about they're all expensive. If we can keep people, our healthy people healthy, and as issues arise, have programs in place that are geared towards them to help them stay in the healthy range, we should see a reduction in, for example, in diabetic medications and insulin use on the plan. If we actually have a good program in place that's making a material difference for our population. So that's what we want to see. I think the prescription drug side is where you really need to focus on.
Definitely that theme I see throughout our conversation has been one that you stress, and it is one that I would completely agree with you as well. There's probably a lot of medications that people are on that if there were simple lifestyle changes, right, that they could make.
That's true.
Yeah, and it's like even that the utilization could you eliminate the utilization potentially if there were some lifestyle changes that preceded that or were in reaction to that. In terms of the future, I know we want to get you out on your way as well and get things moving. Future of this industry, right? Like especially in what we just saw last year and how we're coming out of it, or hopefully showing signs of coming out of it. Is it transparency, big data? Costs. I'd love to just kind of hear what Colin's crystal ball. What you think's gonna happen?
Colin's crystal ball.
Colin's crystal ball.
Right,
what do you think the future holds for us, man?
Well, I do think we've had a movement towards transparency over the last few years, bolstered by the No Surprises Act and some of the legislation. I don't, even if some of that gets delayed, that's where we're going. We simply I'm seeing too many groups that are reprocessing claims based off historical settlement information, for example.
Yeah.
That data's out there. It's just that it's been hidden for many years, and every year we seem to get a bigger data set. And I'm hoping that sometime in the future that we could start reprocessing claims based off of the settlement information, come up with a fair price, and adjudicate claims a little faster, perhaps. Pay these doctors a little quicker.
So rather than taking the approach of like a cost plus model, right? A Medicare plus, you're saying actually using historical settlement data instead and going, well, this is what you took.
I mean, it's a strong argument, right?
Yeah, it's like, you already accepted
this. If you took that 3 years ago for that procedure, why are you not going to do that maybe with a gross up for trend?
Trend, yeah, of course.
Compare it, you could create a basket of fair costs and come up with an average. There's a lot of ways you could do it, but that's where I think big data is going to come into play. Because we have that information that's out there. It's just that it's confidential. It's near state secret for many people. It's hard to get a hold of, but I think it's coming to light, and I'm seeing more and more vendors that are taking that approach.
Okay.
And I'm hope that would be the future, along with more advocacy. I like the direct primary care model.
For sure. Yeah.
Have a great quarterback working on your behalf to steer you again to the most cost-efficient, clinically effective care. Because I just think that that's going to create a lot of results too.
I'm a big fan. We just talked about DPC last podcast.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, big fan of it, just simply because it seems to take us back, generationally to what a primary care relationship used to be like, where you could sit down with your doctor and not feel rushed. And
I'm hoping we see physicians much more involved.
Yeah.
Instead of the big systems, big hospital systems, I like to see more physician-owned facilities, physician-driven organizations, physician groups, really get involved with our plans.
Well, and even to going back to treating, your patient as either a customer at the end of the day, but you want them to have a positive experience. They want them to trust you. Like I feel sometimes you go to the doctor and you got 10 minutes. You got 10 minutes to talk to them, and then they're off to do something else.
Right.
Like I got to remember everything I wanted to ask in this 10-minute period of time. You feel almost like you are a burden to them rather than their patient at the end of the day. So I do like the fact that DPC is refocusing. We talked about, I think you were talking about kind of local or localizing care. I mean, talk about really localizing care. You got a doctor that's right here that has a patient pool. That's who they see. Those are their members. And, you feel like you can reach out to them and text them or call them. You just feel like there's a level of, compassion perhaps reintroduced into the equation rather than transactional. Because at the end of the day, it's I want to take care of myself. You want to take care of your family. You want to know what's best for you. And I feel like if you don't have that more substantive relationship with the doctor, then, all you really are is a transaction to them. Yeah.
I agree. I think that's the future. I really do.
Well, I agree with you, and I certainly hope that's the case, man. So final thoughts, anything you want to leave the audience with, and then we'll obviously ask where we can get in touch with you as well.
Lots of innovation in the healthcare space. I really believe in the group model. I think that self-funding with group plans is going to maintain a lot of value, and we continue to see a lot of innovation in this space. And feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And
LinkedIn is about you.
That's the best way. And part of my job, a big part of my job, is just educating.
Okay.
And sharing with people what we're seeing out in the marketplace, what's working, what's not. But I want people to understand their data sets, what's driving the financial performance of their plans, so they can make informed decisions and not just get caught up in the latest and greatest scheme.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate out there without understanding what it's trying to accomplish. And because there are a lot of competing systems, there are a lot of competing values out there.
A lot of noise.
A lot of noise. So, and that's something that we can definitely bring that signal, within all that noise.
Well, I appreciate that, man. I appreciate you taking an educator's approach. I think that's kind of how I perceive myself in this market. I don't know everything, but I love the fact that you can at least talk about these things and somebody can listen and maybe pick up something. If you take that approach, especially, I think that's what makes a great advisor, is an educator at heart. And I think it's evident that that's the case with you. So, Colin, I really appreciate you coming on, man. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for lending your time and your expertise. And hopefully we can do it again soon sometime.
Thanks, Spencer. It's been great.
Appreciate you, man.